Control of hormone release is the topic of this screencast, which may be found in Chapter 9 of your textbook. This screencast was designed to help you achieve the following objectives. Describe the 3 types of stimuli that result in the secretion of hormones. List the type of information you are expected to know for each hormone that will be discussed in upcoming screencasts. Let's pause for a moment to think about what causes a hormone to be secreted and what stops the secretion of that hormone. When you look at all of the different stimuli or changes that cause a hormone to be secreted, they can all be classified as follows. Nervous stimuli can cause a hormone to be secreted, where a neuron sends an action potential to its axon terminals, resulting in the release of a neurotransmitter which stimulates a cell to release hormones. Humoral stimuli, where some substance in the blood changes and that causes a cell to secrete a hormone. Or hormonal stimuli, where one hormone targets another endocrine cell and causes it to release hormones. Let's first talk about how neurostimuli can cause the release of hormones. And this is an example that you're familiar with because we've already talked about how the sympathetic nervous system causes the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine from the adrenal medulla. So here we have in the spinal cord a motor neuron. That motor neuron sends action potentials down its axon to its axon terminals, which make synapses with glandular cells in the adrenal medulla. In response to neurotransmitters released at the axon terminals, those cells release the hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine, which enter the blood. This is just one example of how neural stimuli can cause the release of hormones. Most release of hormones in response to neural stimuli is under the control of the sympathetic nervous system. Some hormones are released in response to a change in blood levels of some substance, or what we call a humoral stimulus. An example is the release of parathyroid hormone. When calcium levels drop below the normal range in the blood, this causes cells of the parathyroid glands to release the hormone parathyroid hormone. So here, a change in blood levels of calcium causes the release of an hormone. So this is a humoral stimulus, a change in some substance in the blood. Some hormones, many hormones in fact, are released in response to the actions of other hormones, or what we call hormonal stimuli. Certain hormones target other endocrine organs or endocrine tissues, and we call those hormones tropic hormones or simply tropins. Let's look at just a few examples. The hypothalamus, which is part of the brain, the diencephalon specifically, produces many tropic hormones. These tropic hormones target the anterior pituitary gland, causing the anterior pituitary gland to release several tropic hormones. The anterior pituitary gland secretes hormones that target the thyroid, causing the thyroid to release hormones. It produces tropic hormones that targets the adrenal cortex, causing the adrenal cortex to release hormones. It also produces hormones, tropic hormones, that target the gonads, the ovaries, and the testes, causing them to release their own hormones. So these are just a few examples, and we're going to get into the specifics of these different types of hormones later on in upcoming screencasts. But here I just want you to understand that some hormones are released in response to the actions of other hormones, and we call this hormonal stimuli. So in summary, hormones are released in response to one or more of these three types of stimuli. Nervous stimuli, where neurons stimulate cells to release hormones. Humoral stimuli, where some change in blood levels of some substance stimulate cells to release hormones, or where tropic hormones, hormones that target other endocrine organs or tissues, cause the release of hormones by those target tissues. As we talk about different hormones and what causes those hormones to be secreted, you will find that what stimulates their secretion falls into one or more of these three categories. We have now answered the question, what causes the secretion of a hormone? Now we need to talk briefly, at least, about what stops a hormone from being secreted. What turns off hormone secretion? Well, typically, whatever stimulus caused a hormone to be secreted, the action of the hormone reduces that stimulus in a classic negative feedback mechanism. So before we end this screencast, let's review a negative feedback mechanism. If you recall, at the beginning of the semester, we used the household thermostat to illustrate the actions of a negative feedback mechanism. This is an example that all of us are familiar with. So we have a thermostat that is set at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the set point. That is the temperature that we would like the room to be. So that's the set point. Temperature is the variable that is being controlled by the thermostat. Now let's say we have an event, a window flies open in Wisconsin in December. And that causes cold air to rush in, hot air of the room to rush out, and that drops the temperature to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So now we have a stimulus. This drop to 68 degrees Fahrenheit is detected by a receptor, in this case a thermometer. The thermometer communicates the drop in temperature to the control center. The control center is the integration center. It's going to compare the 68 degrees Fahrenheit with the set point of 70 degrees Fahrenheit and make a decision to turn on the effectors, in this case the heaters. The heaters will blow hot air and will attempt to raise the temperature back to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. If successful, the stimulus that caused the heaters to cut on in the first place is completely removed and the heaters will cut off. This is an example of a classic negative feedback mechanism where the actions of the effector, in this case the heaters, reduces or removes the stimulus that caused the effectors to turn on in the first place. Most hormones, certainly not all, but most hormones are regulated by negative feedback, where the actions of the hormones will reduce or remove the stimulus that caused the hormones to be secreted in the first place. And in response, secretion of further hormone will cease. Now that you have been introduced to the endocrine system, you know what a hormone is, you know what stimulates a hormone to be secreted, and you know how hormone secretion is regulated. For the remainder of this module, we will discuss different hormones. And for each hormone, you'll be responsible for knowing the following. I want you to know what organ or gland is responsible for secreting the hormone. I would like for you to know, in general, where that organ or gland is located. For example, I want you to know that the thyroid gland is located in the neck and that the parathyroid glands are located on or around the thyroid, for example. For each hormone, I would like you to know what tissue the hormone targets and the effects of the hormones. You will also need to know the basic chemistry of the hormone. Is it hydrophilic or is it a hydrophobic compound? And lastly, you will need to know how it is regulated. Most hormones are regulated by negative feedback, but there are a few that are regulated by positive feedback. Now let's review the objectives of this screencast. Describe the 3 types of stimuli that result in the secretion of hormones. List the type of information you are expected to know for each hormone that will be discussed in upcoming screencasts. Antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin will be discussed in the next screencast.